If you ever tried to dive into the incredible world of storytelling that is Neil Gaiman, but found yourself overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of his work? Well, you're not alone. From dark fantasy to children's books to graphic novels to magical realism, Neil Gaiman's literary universe is so vast, so varied that it is quite tricky to know where to start. But don't worry, this video is here to help. A spoiler-free beginner's guide to Neil Gaiman with all of the books I talk about linked down below in the description. Sounds good? Let's go. Neil Gaiman is one of those authors that is very hard to label. Yes, you could say he is a fantasy author, but I'm reluctant to do so because he has done very different things as well. Neil Gaiman writes what Neil Gaiman wants to write, which tends to be all over the place. Now, while this might confuse a lot of people, this is also an advantage. Because this means I can give you several possible entryways into his work depending on what you like to read yourself. Now, as a quick disclaimer, I will be talking about his solo work. I'm not going to talk about his graphic novels, I'm not going to talk about his collaborations with other authors, we're talking just Neil Gaiman today. So no Sandman, no Good Omens, but if you would like me to talk more about these things, let me know down below in the comments so I can make a future video on that. So, where do you start? Like I said, it depends on what you like to read. For example, if you come from a background of literary fiction, you like to read things like magical realism, you like your language a bit more poetical, and you like your themes to be complex. Well, then The Ocean at the End of the Lane is your entry point into Neil Gaiman's work. It is a wonderful book. It is a very poetical, complex book about growing up. It is a book about memories, about childhood, about growing up and how our childhood has influenced us, even today. It is a beautifully written book with very poetical language. It is not fantasy but more magical realism. It is a gem. And if you like your books more literary, if you like magical realism, then this is the ideal book for you. It is the kind of book you want to buddy read, or you want to discuss with a book club, or simply want to think about. The Ocean at the End of the Lane is all that, and if this sounds appealing to you, then by all means, this is your way in. But maybe you're more of a fantasy reader. Well, if you are, then why not pick up a book like Neverwhere? Yes, it is one of Neil Gaiman's earliest novels, and it shows. It is less complex than most of his books, it is more straightforward, but it is still an excellent example of what his writing style is all about, how he creates his characters, how he creates his world, and it is one of the earliest examples of an excellent urban fantasy. I know a lot of people tend to look down on Neverwhere because of the earlier mentioned reasons, but it is still one of my all-time favorite books in this genre. So yes, if you are a fantasy reader and a fantasy lover, then why not try Neverwhere? And since we're talking about urban fantasy, yes, we have to talk American Gods. American Gods is possibly one of the most famous books that Neil Gaiman wrote, especially since it came out as a television series, but I would not recommend this as an entry point. American Gods is an urban fantasy road trip that explores American identity. It delves into the melting pot of cultures and influences that is America today and runs with it. But it does get kind of complex. It gets off track in more than one occasion and doesn't always get on track that easily again. Yes, it is possibly one of his most famous books, but I would not recommend it, especially not if you're new to Neil Gaiman's work. And unpopular opinion, I'm personally not a big fan of American Gods. And of course, if we talk about American Gods, we have to talk about Anansi Boys. Neil Gaiman notoriously doesn't write sequels. His fans have been begging him to do so for years now for a sequel for Neverwhere for American Gods, but he never seems to do so. Anansi Boys is what comes closest to a sequel. It is like a companion novel to American Gods. It is a different story, but it features the same world and the same setting. Again, don't start here. If you liked American Gods, then you can proceed into Anansi Boys and you will probably enjoy that one as well, but do read them in that order. So if you come from a fantasy background, I would suggest starting with Neverwhere and then proceed into reading the others. But maybe you prefer YA or even middle grade. Don't worry, Neil Gaiman has got you covered. let's talk the Graveyard Book first. Now, the Graveyard Book does seem to be a middle grade book, but it is far more than that. The Graveyard Book is basically a retelling of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. It is about a boy who is orphaned and he is raised by a number of ghosts living on a graveyard. Just like with Mowgli in Jungle Book, this tends to influence and color his views of the outside world, and of course that outside world will have a tendency to come into the safe space that is the graveyard. The Graveyard Book is an excellent example of Neil Gaiman as a children's author. It is an ideal story to read with children, but it also maintains that more darker undertone, so adults will definitely love this one as well. And if you want it darker, then there's Coraline. Middle grade YA, you might know Coraline from a very creepy animation movie that was made from this book. It is a story about a young girl, Coraline, who discovers a secret door that supposedly leads to nowhere, but when she goes out to investigate, she finds a whole different world, a whole different house than she's used to, with a whole different set of parents. If you like it dark, if you like it creepy, then Coraline is an ideal book for you. Yes, it is early YA, but it doesn't really feel like it. It is creepy, it is atmospheric, it is feral, and adults can absolutely enjoy this one as well. Now, on a lighter, more quirky tone, there is Fortunately the Milk. Fortunately the Milk is a funny little story about a father who has to go out to get some milk, and while he does, he is kidnapped by aliens. And this is a very different Neil Gaiman. It is quirky, it is funny, it is nonsensical. In my opinion, it shows how he is influenced by his friendship with Terry Pratchett, and it is a very delightful, funny, easy read. Children will love this one, and I promise so will you. And no, that's not all. Neil Gaiman is also a non-fiction writer. Now, his most non-fictional work is probably Norse mythology, although I am personally hesitant to call it non-fiction. It is Neil Gaiman's interpretation, Neil Gaiman's retelling of Norse mythology. And if you're interested in Norse mythology, then by all means this is not just an excellent entryway into the works of Neil Gaiman, but also an excellent beginner's course into the whole Norse era. Now, with Norse mythology, I will absolutely recommend the audiobook as well. It is narrated by Neil Gaiman himself, and it truly adds that extra dimension to this book. Neil Gaiman has a very agreeable voice for storytelling, for reading out loud, and just go listen to it. Now, while Norse mythology is marketed as non-fiction, he has more clear non-fiction books as well. The View from the Sheep Sheets is a collection of essays, forewords, introductions, thoughts, you name it, on all things literary. Now, I wouldn't advise you to start here. This is a book that is more for the fan of Neil Gaiman. If you want to know more about him as a writer, about his writing process, how he creates his books, his stories, how he does his world building, then this is an ideal book for you. But it does tend to cater to the more niche reader. If you already are a huge Neil Gaiman fan and you haven't read this one, this is very interesting. But if you're new to his work, then leave this one for later. Like I said, it is quite difficult to categorize Neil Gaiman's universe. So this makes it also quite difficult to properly give structure to this video. So if you're still confused and you still don't know where to start or several ideas appeal to you, then why not start with his short stories? Neil Gaiman is a master of the short story. He's a natural-born storyteller, and writing short stories does allow him to explore a more diverse, a more wide array of themes and stories. From his own spin to the classical fairy tale, to horror books that feature Sherlock Holmes, to urban fantasy, you name it, the short stories probably have it. Start with either Fragile Things or Smoke and Mirrors, because those two are, in my opinion, the best way to discover what storytelling is all about. It allows you to sample different kinds of Neil Gaiman, so it will make it easier for you to know where to go from there. Maybe you prefer his approach to fantasy? Well, then go back to the beginning of this video and start with the fantasy entryway. Maybe your takeaway from the short stories is that you love his classical fairy tale and his children's stories. Then again, go back to the beginning of the video and take that entryway. Neil Gaiman caters to a lot of different genres, a lot of different tastes, and a lot of different people, so yes, he might cater to you as well. Dare to go off the beaten path. Don't start with the books that were made into these big multi-million TV series. Discover the short stories, explore the beauty that is the ocean at the end of the lane. And before you know it, you too might be caught into the rabbit's hole that is the Neil Gaiman universe. If I was able to convince you to read some Neil Gaiman, then do let me know down below in the comments. And if you're already a Neil Gaiman fan, do let me know. What is your favorite Neil Gaiman novel of all times? Again, let me know down below in the comments, and while you're there, leave a like and do subscribe. And who knows, you might be in the market for even more whimsical, witty and absurd fantastical stories? Then all you have to do is watch this video.